Penguin Random House Audio presents Henry Himself by Stewart O'Nan. Read for you by Richmond Hoxie. For my father, and his father before him. The autumn wind, on its way, sets a scarecrow dancing. Buisson. In Memoriam. His mother named him Henry, after her older brother, a chaplain killed in the Great War, as if he might take his place. In family lore, the dead Henry had been a soft-hearted boy, a rescuer of stranded earthworms and fallen sparrows, presaging his vocation as a saver of souls. Salutatorian of his seminary class, he volunteered for duty overseas, sending home poems and charcoal sketches of life in the trenches. At church, the stained-glass window that showed a barefoot Christ carrying a wayward lamb draped about his neck like a stole was dedicated in loving memory of the Right Reverend Henry Leland Chase, 1893 to 1917. The mock Gothic inscription so elaborate it verged on illegibility. And each Sunday, as they made their way to their pew up front, his mother would bow her head as they passed, as if to point out, once more, his uncle's saintliness. When he was little, Henry believed he was buried there, that beneath the cold stone floor of Cavalry Episcopal, as below the medieval cathedrals of Europe, the noble dead mouldered in cobwebbed catacombs, and that one day he would be there too. When Henry was 8, his mother enrolled him as an altar boy, a vocation for which he betrayed no calling, picking at his nails inside his billowy sleeves through the weighted silences and turgid hymns, afraid he'd miss his cue. He had nightmares of arriving late for the processional in his baseball uniform, his cleats clicking as the Holy Conclave paraded down the aisle. The cross was heavy, and he needed to stretch on tiptoe with the brass taper to light the massive Alpha Omega candle. Funerals were the worst, held Saturday afternoons when all of his friends would be at their secret clubhouse deep in the park. The grieving family huddled beside the casket, praying with Father McNulty for the repose of their loved one's soul. But once the service was done and the candles snuffed, the funeral director took charge, bossing around the pallbearers like hired porters as they lugged the box down the front steps and slid it into the hearse. Invariably, Henry pictured his uncle, his nose inches from the closed lid, on a train crossing bomb-pocked French farmland, or in the dark hold of a ship, cold water gliding by outside the thin steel skin of the hull. He had so many friends and well-wishers, the story went, that the visitation, in their grandparents' front parlor, where his sister Arlene taught Henry to play heart and soul on their Baldwin, lasted 3 days and nights. Arlene was named after Arlene Connolly, his mother's favorite singer, which Henry thought unfair. To avoid confusion, among company his mother called him Henry Maxwell, and his uncle Henry Chase, a nicety her side of the family dispensed with, christening him Little Henry. Henry, though not one to make a fuss, would have preferred a nickname of his own choosing, something rough and masculine, like Hank or Huck. He thought Little Henry was bad luck, and in private moments, rooting through his father's workbench in the cellar for a spool of kite string, or on a rainy day, hiding from Arlene in the lumber room beneath the eaves, or after midnight, climbing the boxed-back stairwell with a filched, sticky bun, he felt watched over by a ghost neither kindly nor malevolent, merely a silent presence, noting his every move like a judge. His mother never said precisely how his uncle had died, leaving Henry, with a child's dire imagination, to picture in a flash a German shell catapulting a rag doll of a doughboy through the air, scattering his limbs over a cratered no-man's land, one arm caught in a coil of barbed wire, the hand still clutching a small gold cross. On his mother's dresser, in a silver frame that captured fingerprints, surrounded by other, less interesting relatives from before Henry was born, stood a bleached kodak of her brother on the dock at Chautauqua, proudly holding up a glistening muskie. Each time Henry snuck into his parents' bedroom to puzzle over this snapshot as if it were a clue to his future, he remarked that the fish, like his uncle, was long dead, while the dock and cottage were still there at the water's edge, awaiting them every summer like a stage set. But exactly how these facts were related he couldn't say, only that he felt vaguely guilty, looking at the young and happy, not yet Reverend Henry Chase, as if he'd stolen something from him. Pedigree. The Pittsburgh Maxwells, no relation to the automakers or coffee company, came from the moors of North Yorkshire, with the main concentration around Skelton. Originally sheepherders and tenant farmers, after the signing of the Magna Carta, their descendants filtered into the village proper and became at first guildsmen and then merchants. One, John Lee Maxwell, ultimately serving as a tax collector and deacon in the Church of England. Generations later, an intrepid, or maybe disgraced scion of that line, John White Maxwell, sailed on the Godspeed for the Virginia colony at Jamestown, there taking as his wife the 14-year-old Susanna Good. This, according to a genealogy compiled by a retired pharmacist from Olathe, Kansas, named Arthur Maxwell, a pair of which Emily, whose AOL address had been included in a mass email the week of Thanksgiving, purchased sight unseen as Christmas presents for their two grown children, Margaret and Kenny. Rather than gilt-edged, leather-bound keepsake editions, what arrived by regular mail in a crushed Amazon box several days after the children had packed up the grandchildren and as many leftovers as Emily could foist on them and fled, were two overstuffed three-ring binders of cockeyed photocopies riddled with errors, both typographical and factual, including the incorrect year of his uncle's death. Henry made the mistake of laughing. "I'm glad you find it amusing," Emily said. "I paid good money for these." "How much were they?" "It doesn't matter. I'm getting it back." He doubted that was possible, but nodded thoughtfully. "It's fascinating stuff if it's true. It says here we were horse thieves." "I'm not happy. It was supposed to be a big gift. It's too late now, anyway. At this point, I'm thinking I should just send them back." They'd been married nearly 50 years, and still he had to smother the masculine urge to counsel her on how the world worked. At the same time, agreeing with her too readily would be seen as appeasement, a worse offense, and so, as he often did on matters of little import, he chose the safest response. Silence. "Nothing?" she asked. "You have no opinion whatsoever?" He'd forgotten. He wasn't allowed to be neutral. "I think it's interesting. Let's keep one for ourselves, at least." "Honestly," she said, backhanding the page she was reading, "I could do this. I'm going to send him an email." The holidays were hard on her. It didn't have to be the genealogy. It could be Rufus throwing up on the carpet, or some passing comment of Arlene's about the mashed potatoes. Lately, the smallest things set her off, and though in her looser moments she freely admitted that she'd always been a terror, an only child used to getting her way, as her husband he feared her impatience hinted at some deeper frustration with life and, by extension, their marriage. In this case, His hope was that she would cool off and eventually relent, that the bother of repacking the binders and running them over to the post office would outweigh her anger.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?